Do you love Bob Dylan? Well, I don't. I'm Joe Steigerwald, and I admit I don't quite get Bob Dylan. Does that make me a bad person? Possibly, but at least I'm doing something about it. Join me and co host Dylan Sevey as we explore the entirety of Bob Dylan's discography from 1962's self titled to 2023's Shadow Kingdom in a possibly quixotic attempt to get me to appreciate the multitudes of one of the greatest and most beloved songwriters of popular music.
Hi, fans of high quality entertainment. We are here to talk about Bob Dylan. Thank you. I'm with Glen Kellaway from the basement. You might have heard of him before on my channel. And Joe from Taste Like Music, a channel I've been watching for probably over 3 years. And Dylan Sevey and Joe. What? No.
Sevey.
Sevey.
Yeah. Listen, it's been 32 years of this. I'm used to it.
Yeah, really? Yeah. Sevey. Sevey. I'll try and remember that. So anyway, Joe and Dylan Sevey have been doing a series on Bob Dylan on the Taste Like Music channel. And right now they're up to episode 8. And in each video, every week or two, poor Joe has to listen to a Bob Dylan album.
Poor Joe.
Yeah. And like Joe, I guess, likes Bob Dylan, but he's not necessarily a fan. And he's trying to get to understand Bob Dylan more and possibly become more of a fan like Glenn and Dylan are. I like Bob Dylan too, but I'm kind of like Joe. I like him. And just today they released episode 8, Blonde on Blonde. And so let's start with first with Glenn, how you got into Bob Dylan and everything.
Oh my
Obviously
God.
in the 60s.
This is going back many, many years.
Yeah.
So I would have first heard the name Bob Dylan when Peter, Paul, and Mary released their version of Blowing in the Wind, which was on the radio. So the name, but it didn't really register in any way. It really didn't hit me until Like a Rolling Stone was released, the single in 1965. And then that just blew my mind. I was 12 years old then. And immediately bought the 45. And on the B side of the 45 was Gates of Eden. So then I went in search of the Highway 61 album. I get that. And to my amazement, Gates of Eden isn't on that album. So then I had to bringing it all back home. So they were the first two that did it for me. And then Blonde on Blonde. And then he released like Positively 4th Street and some more great singles in that era. Baby, Can You Please Crawl Out Your Window? And then Blonde on Blonde, just that's my favorite Dylan album. That's it for me. That's the grail. So I've been a fan ever since.
And you just recently saw Bob Dylan in concert again.
Just saw him last month, yeah, at Massey Hall in Toronto. Yeah. Fantastic show.
And Joe, what's your history with Bob Dylan?
Well, it's a long and tortured history. I started out, before I really got involved in music and the whole channel. When I was young, like 13, 14, I heard like Rolling Stone, and I thought it was great. It was one of my favorite songs back in the day. And, I had like brief forays into trying to get into Dylan, and it never really stuck other than, a couple songs here or there. And then when we started the channel, I didn't really dislike Dylan, but I always played up my dislike of Dylan because comparatively to Jason and Ryan, my cohorts on TLM, it was like I hated him because it was like a 3.5, a little bit ambivalent on him. He didn't make many of my lists, the songs of the year, album of the year, all that good stuff. So it kind of became like who I am, my personality. I was the anti-Dylan guy, and I definitely leaned into that. I played the villain whenever Bob Dylan was brought up, and made faces and made little snarky comments. But at some point in the past 3 years, I was like, all right, I better grow up a little bit. I better actually start listening to some Bob Dylan. and I kind of just thought, okay, what's the best way to do this and also get content for the channel? And I was like, well, Dylan never shuts up about Bob Dylan, so I'll ask him to do a podcast, and we'll just go through the albums one by one, and we'll put it out there, and we'll see what I learn.
How long, like, have you figured out, like, how long it's going to take you until it's finished?
Years.
Yeah. Years.
We're at album 7, and we've got all the studio albums, maybe some bonus stuff, maybe some special episodes, rankings, stuff like that. You know, I was expecting it to go a year or less, you know, one every week or so. It's you know, the schedule hasn't always been so tight. So it'll go until we're done mining the, you know, Bob Dylan content.
You're looking at 44 albums?
Is that what we're
40,
up to?
40 studio.
40 yeah. Oh, you're not doing like the live albums, the official live albums in the studio?
I mean, listen, if it were up to me, some of them, yes. But I think for poor Joe here, I think we'll stick with the studio ones, and then, you know, find the right ways to interject and at least talk about, you know, some of the bootleg series and the other important, you know, like, you know, obviously talk about Planet Waves. You have to talk about, you know, the tour that he did with the band after that and whatnot and everything, which became Before the Flood. But I digress. Don't want to be giving away future content here. So.
And Dylan, what's your story with Bob Dylan?
Well, I was in Greenwich Village in '63, and back then, no, I was named after him.
I was going to say,
you're so young looking.
Was, you know, really good skincare technique goes a long way. No, I was born, I guess actually the same year or the year before they did the 30th anniversary concert for Bob at Madison Square Garden with, you know, George Harrison and McGuinn and Patty and Neil Young and everyone. But I'm named after Bob. Very, very musical family. My older sister Erica is named after Clapton. You know, and I knew growing up that I was named after Bob, and I knew who he was. You know, like we had a Bob Dylan poster in our house, and the one I told Joe in the first episode that, you know, the first stuff I knew by Bob was actually stuff off of the next project that him and I were talking about, the Basement Tapes, which I liked because I was a 7-8-year-old boy listening to songs like Yay Heavy and a Bottle of Bread and you know, $1 Million Bash, you know, these really kind of funny comical songs which fit right in with the Rugrats movie soundtracks that I was listening to at the time. But then I had my big musical awakening when I was 8. My dad decided that it was time for me to listen to the Beatles, which theoretically are the perfect band for an 8-year-old kid. So of course he gave me the album with Revolution 9 and Wild Honey Pie and Helter Skelter. and then he gave me Nirvana MTV Unplugged and said, "Here, 8-year-old child, are a bunch of stark acoustic songs about heroin withdrawal." and here I am. So that was my gateway into a lot of the classics, especially. And I went back to Dylan and kind of leapt right into the classics, you know, the ones that Glenn talked about, Bring It All Back Home and Highway 61. And yeah, I don't know, right from the get-go, it resonated with me. I saw him for the first time. My very first concert was Bob Dylan. I was 9 years old in 2000. And I thought it was great. I've seen him 13 times total ever since then. And I think it's one of those things where, you know, we'll eventually get to the later day albums. I hesitate to say where his voice sounds like Tom Waits because I think that will make Joe have a heart attack. But the music doesn't sound like Tom Waits. But even like the later day growly voice never bothered me because that's what I grew up with. You know, I was seeing him live like that from the get-go. And I I think that kind of helped shape me into the huge Dylan fan that I am, because I think a really important tenet to quote unquote getting Dylan is, accepting that this guy is never going to do what you expect him to. He's going to change stuff around. Like, people go to see him live and they talk about how terrible he is, and half the time it's because they're expecting to see him do Blowing in the Wind on his acoustic guitar with his harmonica. But like, I grew up with that expectation of like, oh, I'm going to go to the show and it's going to be awesome, and I'm going to know every song like when it gets to the chorus, and I go, oh yeah, that's what he's singing. And yeah, just sort of, I grew with him from there, and he's just been a constant in my life. Him and the Beatles are my forever. That's the main pedestal, and it's how I discovered literally all of your channels. Larry, I've been watching your channel for probably 5 or 6 years now, and Glenn, I've been watching you pretty much since you came on, and then I found Taste Like Music through, I think, the Bob Dylan ranking. But also as a massive Beatles fan, Larry, that's how I found your channel, and we've got a bunch of friends. We can talk crap about Andy Nichols and Tom Hunyadi and Ken Michaels off the air, all of our arch nemesis. But some people watching this may know I've done a lot of guest appearances on the Two Legs channel with Tom and Andy, and I've been on Ken's channel a bunch, and those are some of my favorite people in the entire world. So this is really cool for me right now.
Well, for me with Bob Dylan, I heard him, I think it was first to 45 with Can You Please Crawl Out Your Window was the B-side. So what would be the A-side?
That was the A-side.
That was the A-side.
That was the A-side. And
Maybe
I remember liking
Buick 6.
Yeah. And then after that, it was Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits Volume 2. And that's when I started to kind of like him. And my favorite Bob Dylan album has always been, and not that I guess I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not religious. But still, I love this. And Mark Knopfler's guitar work on it and everything. And the other album I have is this one. I've got 2 Bob Dylan albums. And a few years back, when the box set of CDs first came out and I bought it, I had it. Yeah, that. I had that for maybe a year. And then I realized maybe I'm not that big of a Bob Dylan fan, and I sold it. But I kind of regret it. I do kind of regret selling it. And then they just re-released that because Glenn, you wanted to buy that before, or you had it before?
I didn't buy it when it first came out, but I had all individual CDs. I probably had the whole catalog anyway, but I really wanted that box set. And, and then eventually went out of print, and it was like $300 to try and buy it. And, they did reissue some copies. I don't know if they found some in a warehouse or they reissued it, but it did come out for a while. And I think I bought it for like $175 or something Canadian. Yeah. And I was lucky, but now I think it's up to $250, $300 again.
Well, I'm not going to break out my Infidels and my Empire Burlesque albums that my parents gave me, because that's all I got from Dylan right now.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get that box set from Santa Claus, so it worked out well for me. Got it when it came out.
Wi-Fi network.
And speaking of Bob Dylan's vocals, I would rather listen to somebody that has some character in their voice. They don't have to be. I find that really great singers, they can sometimes get bored. Like they're sometimes boring, right? But I think like on this album, his vocals are so good. He's a great singer. At least in this time period, I think he sang really well.
Well, he's not a pure singer, but I love his voice because he can put forth any emotion. Like he can, when Bob's angry, when he's in love, when he hates something, and he's just passionate about a topic. He just really has a way of interpreting lyrics, and I don't think anybody else even touches him when it comes to that. So
I mean, I always tell people it's not Bob's voice why I don't like, or why I don't like Bob Dylan. But through this series, I've come to appreciate his vocals more and more. And I always, they weren't a negative for me; they're just kind of there. But now, I can see what other people are hearing. I think he's a pretty talented singer. He's interesting, and yeah, he wears kind of his heart on his sleeve when he's singing. So, people always say that the vocals are, "Oh, I can't listen to Bob because of the vocals," but I think they're thinking of like the stuff that we've already made fun of, the couple songs on Blonde on Blonde, and sort of the stereotype of Bob Dylan, because he really doesn't, he doesn't sound like that. And Dylan keeps telling me he doesn't really sound like that. Just prepare yourself for Blonde on Blonde, because he kind of does there a couple times. But for the most part, I've been pleased with the vocals. Though that Nashville Skyline's one where it's sort of weird as well. So we'll see how I take to that one.
Yeah, I'm on record multiple times, including on Joe and I's first episode together, that he's my favorite singer of all time.
Wow.
Wow, that's awesome.
Simply because what a great singer means to me. There isn't necessarily a huge correlation between technical ability or anything like that. For me, music is a very emotional experience, a very visceral experience, and nobody's voice makes me think and feel more than Bob's. And there are so many other singers I love, I think, that would be considered, great either technically. Everyone talks about, I love Roger Daltrey, I love John Lennon, Paul McCartney, I love Robert Plant, and you'll hear people talk about those guys as the great rock and roll singers, and I completely agree that all those names I just mentioned probably round out the rest of my top singers, but Bob is my number one, because there's something about his voice, in all of its different eras, that kind of feels like home to me. And that's something that I really cherish.
Yeah, even like his Christmas album, I know gets bashed quite a bit. I don't think even Glenn's a big fan of that. But
yeah,
the one
I have a hard time with that one. Just because I don't like Christmas music more than I don't.
But the one video that came from that album, I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was, it was lighthearted and Bob's having fun, and
it's an artistic masterpiece.
Yeah,
absolutely incredible. I'll hear nothing to the contrary.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to put that one on.
Now, Dylan, do you have? Well, you obviously do. I don't know if you want to say it, but do you have a least favorite Bob Dylan album? And would it be kind of a surprise?
No, my least favorite Dylan record is a somewhat popular. When people throw out their least favorite Dylan records, you'll hear people talk about any combination of Knocked Out Loaded, Down in the Groove, Under the Red Sky, which all kind of come from the same era, which is hilarious because they were all released in succession, except in between Down in the Groove and Under the Red Sky, he releases Oh Mercy, which is one of his most critically acclaimed records with some of his best songwriting ever. And then he immediately went back to making extremely subpar music for one more record. I won't reveal exactly which one it is, but it's not a, I'm not going to,
so you're not even going to let Joe know.
I'll let him know when we get to the episode.
Well, yeah, when you're when you're reviewing the album,
Well, I mean, I'm going to be really out of words if Joe happens to somehow like the record, but I will be very surprised if he does.
I want to see the claws come out for at least one Bob Dylan album. That's just what I'm waiting for.
It'll happen.
Okay,
It'll happen. But I told Joe at the end of this last episode that we released today, and I truly mean it. I'm really, really excited for what's about to come up, because we've just talked about what people consider his classic period. Obviously, the Electric Trilogy, as well as those initial acoustic albums, which are very well thought of, highly revered. They're still remembered. Everyone knows those records. You know, there's still a lot of obviously people know, you know, Blood on the Tracks and Desire and Nashville Skyline. Like, those records have stood the test of time. They have a reputation, but I would say we're firmly out of what most people would consider the classic era. So now we're going to get into a lot of stuff that Joe hasn't heard as much, if at all. So there is more room for that. But I think that there's going to be a lot that he likes and even more that he's interested in. You know, anyone can sit around all day talking about how great Bring It All Back Home and Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde are. But these upcoming records aren't really discussed as much, you know, relative to a huge artist like Dylan, where all these albums have been.
Well, it's mind blowing from when he leaves us with Blonde on Blonde, takes a bit of time off and starts hanging around in Woodstock and comes out with John Wesley Harding, which might be the grandfather of Americana music, as far as I'm concerned. And then, you know, just that whole, the band started putting out albums. Music just changed then. Like, that was really influential stuff.
Well, that's why we're taking somewhat of a detour. The next episode, we're talking about the Basement Tapes, which was released as technically a compilation, but it's considered a part of Dylan's canon, like a studio record. I know that when Jason and Ryan ranked all his records a couple years ago, they didn't include the Basement Tapes.
There it is.
But it is technically considered part. It came out in 75, but you know, Dylan's stuff was all recorded in 67 before John Wesley Harding, after Blonde on Blonde. And like I said to Joe, like, this is where, that groundwork is laid for modern day Americana, roots rock, and certainly the next year when the band put out music from Big Pink, that plays a huge role in changing it. But John Wesley Harding even comes before that, and you see that mirrored in, you know, some of what the Stones started doing on Beggar's Banquet, some what the Beatles were doing on, you know, the White Album. They just come off Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour, and then all of a sudden on the White Album, they're kind of not fully stripping things back. It's still a highly produced record, but you know, it's not as much, you know, kind of those psychedelic flourishes and whatnot. But just changing music all the time. That's what he did.
Yeah. I'm curious, because I know Glenn and Joe are big fans, and I am too, if Dylan has heard this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
You don't like it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I like the Byrds. I don't love the Byrds, but I like them. Gene Clark, I mean, he's only on the first 2 albums, right? He's probably my favorite member of the band. So no other might be my favorite Byrds adjacent release ever, including the Byrds catalog.
Yeah.
Just incredible songwriting and arrangements on that record. I have a really good friend. I live in Nashville. I have a good friend who lives here named Erin Ray, who I've played a couple shows with her, and she covers Some Misunderstanding. So I've gotten to play that song a couple times with her.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful song.
So good. So good.
Jealous much?
Bragging. So Larry, I'm interested from you though. So I mean, you heard that single when it came out, and you picked up Greatest Hits Volume 2. You liked it, but you know, you never got. But did you keep tabs on him through the years? Like, did you listen to? Okay, and like other records too. Like Infidels was like not a huge record, but it got some critical acclaim. Oh Mercy, Time Out of Mind. Like, were you listening to those records when they were coming out?
Some of them. I like.
Yeah.
Speaking of Oh Mercy, the song Series of Dreams, which I know wasn't on the album, that is my all-time favorite Bob Dylan song that I know of.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's another endless Dylan conversation that we'll get into one day. Like, why did this guy leave so many
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
songs off these records?
I know, it's insane. It's really
Yeah.
insane. That's why that bootleg series is such a treasure.
Yeah, it really, really is. But so, like, did you just sort of resign yourself a long time
Well,
ago
the
to like?
story, I guess, is when this came out, I was a huge fan. Okay. So I really loved Bob Dylan. And then he released the next album, Saved. And it was a huge disappointment. So I gave up on him. for I did hear some things during the, through the years, but
Hey, listen, Jason from Taste Like Music has that as a top 10 Dylan record, so you better watch what you say about
really
Saved.
for Saved.
Saved? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then, but
I
then
know.
he did a Shot of Love, and it had Every Grain of Sand on it, which is probably my second or third favorite Dylan song.
I stand by that every single record has at least one song that you
Yeah.
can look back to be like, all right, well, at least it has that. And it's not going to be a love fest on my end for the entirety of the catalog. There's some records that I will absolutely be digging way, way, way into, but there's always one, including Saved.
What's that one song of his? Wiggle Wiggle. Was it Wiggle Wiggle?
Wiggle, wiggle, yeah.
I meant wiggle, wiggle, wiggle like a bowl of soup.
Not his best song.
I've heard that one. Actually, I don't hate that one. I thought that has some charm to it. Somebody played it in our Discord once, and I was like, that's not too bad for late period Dylan. I can dig that.
That's from the aforementioned Under the Red Sky, which is
That's
maybe
like,
the
isn't
most.
sorry, but the lyrics for that whole album, because I did listen to some of them, when I had the box set, but it's almost like a children's record.
Yeah, he had a daughter, I think, in 88 or 89, and I think that a lot of the songs were kind of written for her. And
Yeah.
it's one of the most the other reason why I'm excited for everything coming up is because, like, it's hard to make in a 40 album catalog. It's hard to look at every single album and say, well, this is why this one is so interesting. Like, there are definitely a couple where it's going to be like, this is an album that he put out with songs, but for quite a long time, there's always an interesting story around the record. And that record is so interesting because the year before he puts out Oh Mercy, it gets him back in good critical graces for the first time in over half a decade. He had also had the Traveling Wilburys. He's on a record with, Tom Petty, who's one of the biggest rock pop stars at the time, a friggin' Beatle, Jeff Lynne, who everything he's touching in the late 80s turned to gold, Roy Orbison, who's like everyone's hero. He has all this great, he's just started what it turns out to be called the Never Ending Tour unofficially. He has all of this going for him, and then he puts out an album where the first song is called Wiggle Wiggle. And it's,
Enough said.
yeah. What can you say?
Yeah.
But he's like Neil Young, right? He does what he wants to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you were saying, how some people are disappointed seeing him in concert. I saw Neil Young in concert with my youngest son about 10 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. But and at one point during the concert, he does like 15 minutes of guitar feedback, which I liked it. It was okay. But I remember leaving the concert and overhearing a couple. Well, that was disappointing because they're expecting just to hear all the hits, right? Like they don't know the artist that well.
Well, it's because you get other. Sorry, Glenn.
I was just watching an interview on YouTube last night. It was actually from when he was on tour when Infidels came out, and it was Martha Quinn from MTV doing the interview, and it was actually a really good interview. Like, he's really talkative, which sometimes Bob is not. He's a hard interview sometimes. And she asked him a question about how he finds new audiences, and how do you keep young people coming to your country. He says, I don't find anybody, they find me. So I don't go looking for
That's
anyone.
cool.
They look for me,
Yeah.
which is what the comment you were just making about, how do people find Dylan, or how does he find audiences?
One of my favorite Dylan concert experiences. I saw him, I guess it was 10 years ago now, in Memphis. It was a quadruple bill. So Richard Thompson opened the show with his electric
Oh,
trio,
wow.
which was unbelievable. Then My Morning Jacket, easily, top 3 or 4 band for me of the last 20 years. They play second. Wilco, top 2 or 3 band of the last
Wow.
20, 25 years for me. Don't make that face, Joe. Okay. They play third, and Bob Dylan headline. It was a whole thing. They called it the Americanorama Tour. And there were a lot of young people there because it's like, hey, we get to see My Morning Jacket and Wilco, and Bob Dylan is a legend. This is going to be great. And My Morning Jacket and Wilco were both incredible. They're 2 of the best live acts ever, I think, and especially in recent years. And Bob comes on stage, and I was pretty close to him, and I've seen Bob enough times to kind of know with certain facial movements and body languages. And he starts off. Larry and Joe, I don't know if you know the song "Things Have Changed." It was a single, in 2000, I think. It was.
Yep.
He won an Academy Award for Best Original Song because it was in the Wonder Boy soundtrack. And to this day, he still tours with the Oscar on stage with him every night, which I think is hysterical. So they come out with that, and on the recording, it's a worried man with a worried mind. Da, da, da. But he, right from the get-go, just, worried man, worried mind. Just total mumble, no melody, no expression. And I turned to my friend. I was like, I'm pretty sure he's weeding out the people who aren't going to. It is very possible that this just turns out to be a terrible show, but I think he's weeding people out. So that was the whole first song. They go into the second song, a song called Love Sick, the first song on Time Out of Mind. And it's the same thing. Walking. Just, but halfway through the song, I was close enough where I could see him really surveying the audience. And I think he could tell that everyone remaining was there with him and for him. And he jerks his body into motion and cues the band to go up a notch. And I swear to God, he sings like a fucking angel for the rest of the show. Yeah. And he just totally turns it on. They play She Belongs to Me, from Bring It All Back Home. And, he's not singing it exactly like 1965, but no rasp in the voice, perfectly singing the melody, so energetic the rest of the show. He's going to fuck with you. And I can understand why that turns people off, just as I can understand why Neil Young doing 50 minutes of feedback. Because we're also, you and I, Larry, especially, it's we are so in tune with oh, McCartney's on tour again. What's the set list looking like? But when Paul goes on stage, he's going to recreate every single song exactly like the record. Yeah. And there are other artists that do that. And that's fine too, to a degree. Bob is not that. He's never going to be that. He's never going to do that. He's sometimes, maybe you could argue, overly antagonistic, but I think it's fascinating. I think it's one of the many, many fascinating things about him.
Well, that's what makes his discography and what we're doing, I think, in the podcast so interesting, because you really just, for me, I never know what's going to be next.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard Bob Dylan, the 1962 debut, and it kind of blew my mind because I thought it was going to be some lame, Peter, Paul, Mary kind of strum fest. So for me, it's been really interesting, just seeing where he's going and what he's doing, and the stories behind it, and how almost like Dylan said, antagonistic to what's going on in the world and pop culture. If when people are going right, he's going left, and it's just really interesting to me reading. I got this book, the Bob Dylan All the Songs book, and following along what he's doing and thinking, and sometimes it's just as interesting as the music to me, just the history and the story behind what Bob's doing and thinking. And he was a nut, I'll say that. And we're not even through the 60s yet.
I think at the end of this series, on the final episode, Joe should announce if he's a Bob Dylan fan or he isn't.
It's kind of an interesting concept. I was talking with somebody about this the other week, and actually Joe and I even discussed this on another episode. I don't know how we got there because, as you can tell, I'm not one to go off on tangents or anything. But I was talking about how, like, growing up, I was not into the Beach Boys. I couldn't stand them. I thought it was music for kids. I liked God Only Knows, and that was it. And then like in my early 20s, people started showing me some of like the post Pet Sound stuff, like, stuff from Friends and 2020 and Sunflower, Surf's Up, Holland, stuff like that. And like that really kind of caught my attention. Now I'm at a point where I've gone through their whole discography, and I appreciate them and I like them more now than I ever have. But
There's always a but.
but I do think it's like, I think there can be a line between saying like I like an artist and I'm a fan of an artist.
Yeah.
I do think those are two different things, because I would say I like the Beach Boys, but like to call myself a fan almost seems disrespectful to people who are actually fans and like really care that much and are that passionate. It's like, yeah, I think Sunflower is pretty cool. Like that's probably my favorite Beach Boys record. But like there are people who, they've changed their lives. So who am I to be like, yeah, I'm a fan?
I'm trying to convince Glenn, and it's not working, that Pet Sounds, I've always really liked the album, but just in the last year or so, it just hit me how great it is. And Glenn just
Most overrated album of all time, Larry.
Here we go.
I have to keep. I have to keep
8
my mouth
songs
shut on
and
this one.
five pieces of filler, or how many pieces of filler?
I mean, at the end of our podcast, I hope to determine, if I am. I mean, I can't say I'm not a fan of Bob Dylan as a person, but I think I said this in an episode. My liking of him and his music is almost like clinical and scientific more than it is like passionate. Like, I don't have a lot of passion for Bob Dylan. Like, I enjoy his songs and his music, at least what I've heard so far. But I don't have any like warm, cushy feelings for Bob Dylan like I do for the Beatles and the Beach Boys and my favorite artists. With Bob, it's always kind of like he's a really nice picture in a museum. Like I can kind of study him and look at him, but like I'm never gonna have like the full on love of that kind of thing. It's always like a pane of glass between me and him. So we'll see if that pane comes down or breaks. Whatever. If Dylan can help me break the pane of glass in front, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just continue to like Bob Dylan, but not be a fan. Like Dylan is. He's more of a simp, really. But
I don't disagree.
Joe, I got to ask you guys. Just kind of new to your channel and looking back, like about 3 years ago, you did a ranking of all the Bob Dylan albums. Am I right?
I was not on that.
You were on that.
I didn't. It was there. They were doing it in a week period, and there was just no way I was going to listen to 37.
Okay.
Just the thought of that alone made me.
I didn't watch it. I just saw the thing, and I was going to watch it, and I didn't know you weren't on it. So
no, I was not on that one. But that kind of spurred this whole thing with Dylan. Like, okay, I better listen to him at some point. So how do I get content out of this and make Dylan Sevey do all the work while I just kind of be like, oh yeah, this was a good song, and this was a good song. Dylan, explain everything about this album to me and our views is basically how it's gone so far.
But
works for me.
It's a good idea for others to do too, right? To two people, and one is a big fan and the other one is kind of not sure, and going through all the albums one by one. It's really interesting.
I mean, I think it can help. I mean, I don't know if I'd be if I was on my own and didn't have to answer to anyone, I may have, may not be so into the whole Dylan experience. Like having to be like, okay, I'm not going to lie about my like or dislike to Dylan.
Yep.
So I really got to like get into it and research it. And you know, if I was all alone, I might just be like, you know what, I'm just going to lean into the villain side of this and say I don't really like Bob Dylan, and I might not listen to it very intently and closely, and just sort of be like, okay, yeah, this is Dylan. He's doing his Dylan stuff. But it's, you know, it's like having a tutor or somebody, you know, a parent kind of grading your homework before it goes out. So that's why I'm doing it. I plan to do another one after, maybe with my sister, actually, with an artist that she loves that I don't care for. So
I think it'd be a good idea, Glenn, for me and you to do like either Ween or Lou Reed.
Well, thanks, Larry. I thought we were
Well, I
friends.
mean, look, you guys can and maybe even should do Bob Dylan, but I think that Joe and I would just respectfully ask that you wait for our series to
Hell yeah.
finish
We'll be
first.
dead by the time you guys are done. We're too old to wait.
Enough
you guys
busy
can
being
take a
born is
hiatus
busy
while we
dying.
do ours.
No, well, I think that Joe and I will get it done within 2 years,
Oh my God.
including like any bonus episodes and anything, and taking into account there might be like 2 or 3 weeks here and there where might not be able to get together and whatnot. But
It would be interesting at the end of this, if Joe remembers all of these albums, for him to do his top 10 Bob Dylan songs at the end. And his top 10 worst.
I mean, I think at the end, at some point, you know, 2026 or 7 or whenever this happens, if Jason is still with the channel and all, maybe we'll do the ranking, and we'll do a big Bob Dylan week or something like that, just to get, you know, the best songs, because I love ranking things. So if I'm going to listen to 30, 40 Bob Dylan albums, I better get a ranking out of it, or 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah. What kind of I haven't actually read too many of the comments on, but what's the feedback on this series so far? Like, is there anything really negative or
feedback is that they love Dylan and that I'm okay, and I should be proud of myself for
that's
listening
not
to
true.
Dylan and trying to understand his greatness. And eventually I'll just probably leave everything to Dylan. I'll just come on and introduce it and then just kind of slide off.
That's not true. I think that people love Joe as much as they admire his bravery. I would say that it's mostly been positive. I think at the beginning, you know, it's a great phenomenon, not just on YouTube, but online in general, where people have this idea that if they have a thought, it means that they must say it.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way that the world can continue spinning if someone doesn't know my opinion on this matter.
Yeah.
So I think at the beginning, the first couple videos, and it was like the same people leaving comments like, I don't like Bob Dylan. I don't want to watch this video. This is,
why are you
and it's
watching
like,
it?
well, then don't.
Yeah.
Then stop.
Yeah.
Like, you don't like, and there's still a stray one here and there, and sometimes again it's the same people. It's like, brother, I understood you on the last album when you said that you didn't really like him. You know, and that's fine. But like, you know, believe it or not, every thought that passes through your head doesn't, you know, says the guy who never stops talking. But
They call that thread crapping on the Steve Hoffman music forums.
I like that. But I should say that is a very small minority. I think genuinely 99% of the commenters have been really positive, left a lot of good feedback, a lot of good reviews. It's been fun for me because, you know, like, truly, you know, I'm a fan of the Taste Like Music channel. You know, I started watching them during COVID. I've been obsessed with, you know, ranking things and talking about music my whole life. And so, you know, it was like, oh my God, there are other people who are as helplessly as nerdy as I am. That's so amazing. And, you know, to the point where, you know, if they're ranking an artist who I've never even heard a single song by, I'll still watch the
Yeah,
video. And
I'm the same
so,
way.
so it's been fun for me, and Joe mentioned the Taste Like Music Discord that him and Jason are both very active in, and then Ryan, I've actually gotten to meet in person a few times. He lives up in Chicago. I've met him there on tour, and so we text back and forth sometimes. So like just getting to know them, and the same thing is why it's so cool for me to be talking to you right now, Larry, and you, Glenn. And why I started listening to Two Legs just as a fan. Then the next year I was writing them their theme music. I just have a way of infiltrating all of my favorite YouTube channels. That's my way of not being able to contain my thoughts. I just have to weasel my way in.
And speaking of your music, Dylan, I listened to it on Bandcamp, and I'll have a link, for everybody for Taste Like Music, the Bob Dylan series, and your Bandcamp. I was expecting it to maybe be okay. It was really, seriously, it was really good. So I hope people check it out. I was really impressed.
I'm happy that my presence screams probable mediocrity. I'm glad that that's the vibe.
It's slightly above mediocre.
Are you talking about my solo music or the group that I play with? The Minx?
Dylan and the Gentlemen. I heard.
Oh yes.
Understood Up for Myself. That was the one that I listened to.
Yep.
Yeah, Understood Up for Myself. That's what I listened to. That was a beautiful song.
Joe, did you listen to my song? What do you think of it, huh?
I don't want to get into that here. I'll tell you off there.
It's kind of like when you're doing one of the Bob Dylan albums, and Dylan, you're waiting to find out from Joe if he likes the album or not. I understand that feeling, right? Like I'm waiting for him to like Ween, but he doesn't even he thinks the name's silly, so he won't even listen to them.
I didn't, the aforementioned My Morning Jacket, I didn't listen to for years because I thought, based off their name, that they were like this Breaking Benjamin, like new metal type band.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I hate, Shine Down and stuff like that. And then I saw them open for Tom Petty, and like going into it, I was like, oh, I have to sit through this crappy band. And then they blew my mind. I've been a huge fan. So maybe that's just what Glenn needs. Glenn needs to, against his will, go to a Ween show and be.
Glenn, have you heard of My Morning Jacket?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, Jim James or Yim Yames.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Larry, you should give. I think you'd probably like the albums Z. It Still Moves, Evil Urges, Circuital. I think those records would probably resonate with you. Okay. Really, really good stuff.
Glenn, you should show them the ticket you have there.
Yeah, earlier this year, I had an opportunity to secure what I think is pretty rare. It's so the famous tour, Dylan and the Hawks or whatever, do the world tour in '66, and the Bowie. Everybody knows the history of it. But just prior to that, in '65, when they were getting ready for the world tour, they did a few shows. They did one at Massey Hall in Toronto in November 1965. That venue holds about, 2,600 people. So, I mean, I don't know how many ticket stubs are still around from that, but I had an opportunity to secure one this year, and I picked it up. I have it framed. I got to see if I can find it here. I tried to take a picture of it because it's on my wall. I'll see if it.
Yeah, you can see it.
$4.
I'm willing to bet that might be the only one in existence. November 1965. So that's surprising.
So, $4 was probably really expensive back then.
Can you imagine? And then I did my first Dylan shows were the Rolling Thunder shows in 1975. I went to both shows at Maple Leaf Gardens, and I have a ticket stub.
Fuck you! That's so cool.
Yeah, they were my first Dylan concerts. So.
Well, Glenn, tell them about some of the bands you saw in the late '60s.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to see lots of bands. I started going to concerts pretty early. I saw 1968. I saw Cream at Massey Hall, and I saw Frank Zappa and the Mothers at a small venue in Toronto. I saw the original Jeff Beck group with Rod Stewart and Ron Wood from the Truth album. I saw that in a really small club. I saw Blind Faith. I saw Jimi Hendrix. I saw Janis Joplin. I saw pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
That's really cool, Glenn. I'm super happy for you. Well,
it was a good time to grow up.
So any last parting words? And then make sure you even subscribe to Glen Kellaway from the Basement. But more importantly, make sure you check out the Bob Dylan series on Taste Like Music and check out Dylan's Bandcamp site. It's excellent.
So does Joe have a favorite song so far that kind of resonated with you, or?
My favorite song going into this was Like a Rolling Stone, followed by Positively 4th Street.
Is there something that like you've discovered that you didn't know until you started the journey and went, oh man, how did I not hear this song before? This is incredible.
The one that I really like on Blonde kind of blew my mind a little bit was Absolutely Sweet Marie. That's probably my favorite new. I've heard it before, but I had no recollection of it. So I'll pretend it's new to me, and that's the one that I've really liked the most of the ones that I really had no recollection of.
Did you pick up on the Norwegian Wood thing on Blonde on Blonde?
On fourth time around. Oh yeah. I commented on that one. Dylan doing Lennon doing Dylan.
Well, Lennon was Dylan, and then Dylan went, I can do you, I can do you.
Which you then referred to as the Jamaica jerk off of Blonde on Blonde, which is, and I want to give you credit because you've said some impressively asinine things in the past, but that's way up there.
That was highlighted as a favorite in the Discord today. Quote of the year, I believe, is what it is referred to.
Our buddy Jens said that.
Okay. Any last words there, Dylan?
No, thank you so much for having us on and plugging the show. Like I said, it's an honor for me to be on the show. I think I've finally now been on every YouTube channel.
Glenn, you've never said it's been an honor to be on one of my live chats.
I haven't said that out loud, Larry.
No,
I'm always thinking it. No.
And Joe?
Well, it's great to be here as always. It's the second time on the show, and it's always interesting to talk to some Bob Dylan fanatics like Glenn and maybe a non-believer like you, Larry. So it's good to have some backup, some support.
I was thinking maybe we can do this again in a few years. No, a few months.
Maybe after the 70s.
Have Sam St. John on. He's another big Bob Dylan fan, and
once we finish up.
What's crazy is we've been doing this talking for an hour, and we haven't even skimmed the surface. Like this conversation could go on for days.
That's the thing. It's like this last episode that we put out was easily the long. Everything up to this point had been between like 20 and 40 minutes, and then it's Blonde on Blonde. It went for an hour, and even then, every single episode, it's like, because we're not going song by song. Probably on Blonde, we talked more, I think, about each individual song that we had in the past. But there's always, after the show, I'm always thinking like, oh, we should talk about this. We should talk about this. But it's funny that you just called Larry a non-believer, because on his favorite Bob Dylan record, track 2, Precious Angel, you either got faith or you got unbelief, and there ain't no neutral ground.
And I Believe in You. Right, that's another song.
There we go.
Yeah,
it's always the Bob Dylan fans really, nailing you to the cross. It's either in or you're out. There's no middle ground.
I've tried to let Joe know from the beginning that I have space for him and his opinions, and I don't judge him too much either way. But it's been really, really fun so far. And seriously, Larry, thank you so much for letting us come on and talk about it.
You're welcome.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Really good to be on with you guys.
Yeah. We'll do it again for sure in, a few weeks or months or whatever, and promote some more
series. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Look forward to coming back on.
Okay. Thanks. Stay on for a second if you want, but bye, everybody. Make sure you subscribe.